I didn't recognize my own name when I saw it written on that envelope. It sat on the kitchen table like it didn't belong there, pale against the dark wood, too quiet for something that had traveled so far to reach me. The handwriting was careful, measured, even polite, like the writer wanted to make sure I'd read every letter exactly as it was meant. Outside, Christmas lights blinked in the neighbor's window across the street. Red. Green. Red again. Inside my house, the kettle screamed itself empty on the stove, and I didn't move to stop it. The sound felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. I already knew who the letter was from. I just didn't know why it had come now. I turned off the burner and carried the kettle back to the sink, my hand steady out of habit more than calm. When you live alone long enough, you learn how to move through rooms quietly, how to let moments pass without reacting to them. Still, the envelope pulled at me, as if it had weight, as if it was calling me back into something I'd spent years trying not to remember. 7 years. That's how long it had been since my ex-husband's name had entered my home. Since I'd allowed myself to think of him as more than a locked door in my mind, one I walked past without touching. The return address was printed neatly in the corner. A correctional facility in another state. No frills. No attempts to soften what it was. I made coffee before opening it. Black. Too strong. The way I drank it now. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding me, pulling me back into my body when my thoughts tried to run ahead. Christmas had never been loud in our house, even in the years when we were still married. We weren't the type to throw parties or host big family dinners. But it had been warm then. Predictable. The kind of warmth that comes from routine rather than celebration. A small tree by the window. A pot of soup simmering on the stove for no real reason. My husband, back when he was still my husband, standing too close to the counter, humming off-key while pretending he didn't care whether the lights were crooked. I used to think love felt like leaning. Like not having to stand all the way on your own. I sat down across from the envelope and rested my hands on the table, palms flat, like I was bracing myself. The paper was thin, institutional, the kind that tears easily if you pull too hard. Inside was a single folded sheet. No photos. No extras. Just words. I unfolded it slowly, as if rushing might undo something. I don't expect forgiveness. That was the first line. Not hello. Not my name. Not an apology dressed up to sound gentle. Just that. My chest tightened the way it used to before conversations I knew wouldn't end well. The way it used to feel when he'd look at me with that calm expression and explain why I was wrong, even when I couldn't quite see how. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote, and I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know the truth, before another Christmas passes. The room felt smaller all at once, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I hadn't thought of him in months. Not really. He existed somewhere behind my days, a shadow that only moved when the light hit it just right. And now here he was, choosing Christmas of all times to reach out, to reopen something I'd spent years carefully closing. He wrote plainly about prison. No self-pity. No excuses. He described the days as repetitive, the nights as long. He said time moved differently there. Heavier, slower, like every minute wanted to be noticed. Then my fingers began to tremble. I've had nothing but time to think, he wrote. And I owe you honesty, because you never got that from me when it mattered. I stared at the words until they blurred. Honesty had always been the thing he said he valued most. It was the word he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, trustworthy. Back then, I'd believed him. I believed that calm voices meant truth, that steady eyes meant safety. I read on. He admitted to things I'd suspected but never been able to prove. Accounts opened in my name. Documents signed with explanations that had sounded logical at the time. Conversations where he gently redirected my questions, making me feel foolish for asking. I told myself I was protecting you, he wrote. But I was protecting myself. Memories surfaced uninvited. The way I'd defended him to friends. The excuses I'd made when something didn't add up. The nights I'd told myself I was imagining things, that marriage meant trust, even when my instincts whispered otherwise. My coffee sat untouched, cooling. You didn't ruin my life, the letter said. I did. You were loyal. I took advantage of that. Something in my chest cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but enough to let air in where there had been none for years. For so long, I had carried the weight of his mistakes as if they were mine. Because I stayed. Because I trusted. Because I loved. When everything finally collapsed, when the authorities came, when his lies were no longer contained, I told myself I deserved the fallout for not seeing sooner. For not asking harder questions. For being, as he once said, too trusting. I folded the letter halfway and stared at the table, my reflection faint in the polished wood. Outside, a car passed, tires crunching over frost. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. Life was moving forward, indifferent to the quiet unraveling in my kitchen. I unfolded the letter again. You were never weak, he wrote. You were faithful. And faithfulness isn't stupidity. It's courage, misplaced. Tears rose slowly, surprising me with their steadiness. Not the kind that come with sobs, but the kind that sit in your eyes and make everything shimmer. I wasn't crying because I missed him. I was crying because, for the first time in years, someone had named the thing I'd been too ashamed to say out loud. Wasn't broken. I had been loyal. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself in the solidness of the moment. The letter lay open beneath my hand, no longer just a message from the past, but a doorway I hadn't expected to see again. Outside, the Christmas lights blinked. Red, green, red. I didn't know yet what I would do with the letter. But I knew something had shifted. And once something shifts, it never goes back to exactly the way it was before. I left the letter open on the table and walked into the living room, as if changing rooms might quiet the noise inside my head. It didn't. The living room looked exactly the way it always did this time of year. Bare. No tree in the corner. No garland on the mantel. I'd told myself it was simplicity, that I preferred things clean and uncluttered. But the truth sat heavier than that. Decorating had begun to feel like pretending, and I was tired of pretending. I sat on the edge of the couch and listened to the house settle. The low hum of the refrigerator. The faint tick of the clock. Sounds you only notice when there's nothing else competing for your attention. I thought about the last Christmas we'd spent together. It had been quiet then too. He'd stood in the doorway watching me wrap gifts, his hands tucked into his pockets, his smile gentle but distant. I remembered thinking he looked tired. I'd asked him if everything was okay, and he'd nodded, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Just work, he'd said. Nothing you need to worry about. I'd believed him. I always believed him. Back then, trust felt like a virtue. Something to be proud of. I wore it the way I wore my wedding ring. Visible, unwavering, a signal to the world that I was committed. I didn't understand yet that trust, when it's one-sided, can become a kind of silence. The kind that swallows questions before they're even spoken. I stood and walked back to the kitchen, drawn again to the table. The letter waited where I'd left it, patient. I picked it up and read the next paragraph, my eyes moving slower now, as if each word needed permission to exist. He wrote about the day he was sentenced. About the sound of the judge's voice echoing in the courtroom. About the moment he finally understood that there would be no explaining his way out of this. I thought of you, he wrote. Not because I wanted comfort, but because I realized how much you'd given up believing in me. That line made my stomach twist. I remembered the courtroom too. The way the air felt too cold. The way I'd sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, listening to details of his life I'd never known. Accounts. Transactions. Decisions made without me, even though they carried my name. People glanced at me with something between pity and judgment. I couldn't tell which hurt more. At the time, I told myself I'd survived it. That I'd moved on. But survival and healing aren't the same thing. I'd built a quiet life afterward. A careful one. I worked. I came home. I filled my evenings with routines that didn't ask much of me. The library became my refuge, rows of stories neatly shelved, problems that resolved themselves by the final page. In books, endings made sense. In life, they rarely did. The letter shifted in my hands as I turned it over, reading each sentence like it might disappear if I didn't pay close enough attention. I don't want anything from you, he wrote. No visits. No letters back. I just needed you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then. Believed him. Not because he deserved belief, but because the words didn't ask for absolution. They didn't try to pull me back into something I'd already escaped. They stood on their own, uncomfortable and bare. Still, I felt the familiar pull of responsibility tug at me. The old instinct to respond, to smooth things over, to make sure everyone felt okay. Even now. Especially now. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope, then immediately took it out again. I wasn't ready to put it away. Not yet. It felt like doing that would mean deciding something, and I wasn't there. Outside, the sky was already darkening, the early winter dusk pressing against the windows. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a Christmas song, muffled through walls and distance. The sound made something ache in me, not sadness exactly, but longing for a version of myself I wasn't sure existed anymore. I sat down again and let my thoughts drift back further, to the beginning. When we first met, he had been charming in a quiet way. Not loud, not flashy. He listened. Asked questions. Remembered small details about my life that no one else seemed to notice. He said he liked that I was steady. "You don't rush," he'd told me once. "You think things through." I'd smiled at that, proud. I liked being seen as dependable, as someone you could count on. Over time, that steadiness became expectation. Then obligation. Then, slowly, invisibility. I remembered moments that hadn't felt wrong at the time. Him handling paperwork because it made more sense. Him encouraging me to focus on my job, my routines, while he dealt with bigger decisions. "You trust me, don't you?" he'd ask, his voice calm, his expression open. And I did. Because trust to me had always meant love. The clock ticked louder as the minutes passed, each sound marking time I couldn't get back. I realized my coffee had gone cold, untouched. I poured it down the sink and watched it swirl away, dark against the white porcelain. I didn't know what I would do next. I only knew that reading his words had opened something I'd spent years keeping sealed. A door I'd told myself was locked for good. The question wasn't whether I would respond. The question was what responding would mean, for me. Christmas lights blinked again outside the window, their reflection faint in the glass. Red. Green. Red. I stood there for a long moment, envelope in hand, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of a choice I hadn't expected to face. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wondered, not what I owed him, but what I owed myself. Would you like me to continue to part 1, segment 3 of 3? I didn't answer the question right away. Instead, I carried the envelope with me into the bedroom, as if the room where I slept might hold some kind of answer. The bed was neatly made, the comforter smooth, untouched by any warmth but my own. I'd learned to keep things orderly. Order made it easier not to feel how empty the space beside me was. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and held the envelope in my lap, my thumb tracing the crease where it had been folded. There was a time when I would have read every word of his letter again and again, searching for tone, meaning, apology hidden between the lines. But this time felt different. This time, the letter wasn't pulling me backward. It was pushing something forward. Leaned back against the headboard and let my eyes close. The quiet followed me here too, but it felt softer somehow, like it wasn't demanding anything from me. Just presence. I thought about all the years I'd spent replaying the past in my mind, editing it, questioning it, wondering what I should have done differently. I told myself that if I'd been smarter, stronger, less trusting, things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. But sitting there, holding his words, something else became clear. I hadn't stayed because I was afraid to leave. I stayed because I believed in commitment. I stayed because I believed people when they said they loved me. And believing someone isn't a flaw. It's a risk. I opened my eyes and stared at the opposite wall, where a small crack in the paint ran from the corner of the window frame down toward the floor. I'd noticed it years ago and never fixed it. It reminded me that not everything broken needs to be hidden. Some things just are. The letter rustled softly as I unfolded it again. Near the end, his handwriting changed slightly, the lines less even, as if his hand had grown tired. "I don't know what forgiveness looks like," he wrote. "I only know that I've already lost the right to ask for it. But I hope someday you stop carrying what was never yours." That sentence stayed with me. Stop carrying what was never yours. I realized then how heavy I'd been walking through life, even after everything was over. How often I'd measured myself against my mistakes instead of my intentions. How quietly I'd punished myself for loving someone who didn't deserve it. I set the letter aside and stood, crossing the room to the window. Outside, the street was calm, bathed in the soft glow of holiday lights. A couple walked by, their shoulders brushing as they talked. Somewhere nearby, a door closed, laughter spilling briefly into the cold air before disappearing again. Life went on. It always had. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, feeling its coolness ground me. Christmas used to feel like a deadline. Another year gone, another reminder of what hadn't worked out. But standing there I felt something shift. Maybe this Christmas wasn't about looking back. Maybe it was about laying something down. I turned back toward the bed and sat again, picking up the envelope one last time. I slipped the letter inside, careful not to crease it further, and placed it on the nightstand instead of hiding it away. Not as a wound, but as a marker. A reminder of where I'd been, and how far I'd come. I didn't write back that night. I didn't make any promises or decisions. I simply allowed myself to sit with the truth. That I had survived something that once felt unsurvivable, and that survival didn't have to come with lifelong punishment. When I finally lay down, the house no longer felt quite so empty. Still quiet, yes, but no longer heavy. The silence had softened, like it was making room for something new. As sleep crept in, I thought about the days ahead. About Christmas morning. About whether I might finally put up a small tree, just for myself. About what it would feel like to step into the next year without the weight of old guilt pressing on my shoulders. I didn't know yet how I would respond to the letter. But for the first time I knew this much. Whatever I chose to do next would be for me. And that, in itself, felt like the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. Before everything fell apart, our life felt ordinary, maybe even enviable to someone looking in from the outside. Our house wasn't large, but it was warm. A 2-story brick with ivy climbing the sides, maple leaves collecting in the gutters every fall. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee, especially on weekend mornings. That was my doing, of course. Tiny routines that made the house feel lived in, grounded, safe. My husband and I had met in college, both of us majoring in something practical. Me, English, him, finance. He was quiet but attentive. There was a steadiness about him that drew me in immediately. He remembered the small things. My favorite tea, the way I liked my books stacked on the nightstand, the names of the librarians at the tiny local branch where I worked. That attentiveness felt rare and precious. Our marriage, at first, was built on simple gestures. Sunday breakfasts, long walks, quiet conversations in the evenings when the world outside the house slowed down. He would read the newspaper aloud while I sipped coffee, my fingers tracing the rim of the mug as he muttered about politics or the stock market. Sometimes I'd laugh at the way he mispronounced names or misread a headline, and the sound of his chuckle would warm the room. We didn't have children right away. We agreed to wait, focusing on careers and stability. It felt responsible grown up, and for a time, I thought that patience was a sign of wisdom. Looking back now, I realize it was also a sign of how carefully he structured the life around himself. Everything had order, predictability, control. Christmas during those years was understated but comforting. We never had family over, and I liked that. I'd bake a pie or roast a chicken, just the two of us. He'd insist on adding lights outside, stringing them along the roofline while I untangled knots of garland in the living room. He never admitted he liked it, but I knew he did. I liked to imagine him remembering that Christmas years later, a small memory tucked into his mind somewhere. Yet, even then, there were subtle signs I missed. Little inconsistencies that didn't make sense at the time. A missing receipt, a late phone call he brushed off as work, an expense I couldn't account for. I shrugged it off, trusting him, believing in the steadiness I had fallen in love with. I told myself that loyalty wasn't weakness. It was a virtue. I worked at the library, a small branch in our town. It was quiet, predictable, safe. People came in and out, children asking for storytime books, elderly patrons returning novels they'd read 10 times over. I knew everyone's name, and they knew mine. My days were orderly, structured. My life a gentle rhythm of shelving books, stamping cards, and offering guidance when asked. He worked in finance, a field that seemed to suit him perfectly. He was meticulous, exacting, calculating. I admired that. I told myself it complemented my own softer approach to life. Where I nurtured, he managed. Where I cared for people, he managed money. Together we were balanced, or so it seemed. Our weekends were filled with routines I now remember fondly. Coffee on the porch, errands done efficiently, evenings spent with a movie or a quiet conversation about nothing in particular. He never shouted. Never threw things. Never made me feel unsafe. That was his charm. Quiet control, steady presence, and a calm voice that could make even the most pressing problems seem manageable. But control has a way of hiding cracks. Looking back, I can see the moments where the ordinary life began to bend. A bank statement left unopened. A conversation brushed aside. A detail that didn't quite fit. None of it seemed alarming at the time. None of it made me question my choice to trust. I wanted stability. I wanted normal. I wanted love. We were moving through life together, or at least I thought we were. I believed that loyalty and patience would carry us through any challenge. I believed that small kindnesses could outweigh unspoken secrets. I believed in the life we had built because it felt safe, familiar, and true. Christmas, though quiet, became a marker for these beliefs. Every year, I'd decorate a little, cook a little, smile a little more than I felt. He would tease me gently about perfectionism, and I would smile, secretly pleased that he noticed. Those small routines, those tiny gestures, were the threads that held us together, or so I thought. It never occurred to me that trust, while beautiful, can also blind you. That stability, while comforting, can sometimes mask something entirely different. That what looks ordinary on the surface may have hidden depths, shadows that no one sees until they suddenly rise to the surface, shaking everything you thought you knew. At the time, I didn't question anything. Life moved forward, predictable and safe. I believed in the rhythm of our ordinary days, in the quiet comfort of our routines, in the love I thought we shared. I believed that the world inside our home was real and true. It was real. But it was not what I thought. It's strange how memory works. The ordinary moments, those small quiet gestures we almost forget, sometimes hold more truth than the dramatic ones we carry like badges. I remember the smell of his cologne, subtle and woody, lingering on the coat he hung by the door. I remember the sound of the mailbox rattling in the afternoon, the way he'd peek outside and smile at me, even on the coldest days. Small things that made life feel like it was ours. Our marriage had its rhythms, its unspoken codes. We didn't argue loudly. Disagreements were subtle, almost invisible, like a shadow passing over sunlight. He would tilt his head, explain why my concerns didn't make sense, and I would nod, trusting him because his voice was steady, calm, reasonable. I thought that was love. I thought that was normal. I thought that was what marriage should be. Christmas mornings were my favorite. Not because of gifts, not because of decorations, but because of the ritual of waking up together. He would make coffee just the way I liked it, and I would let the scent fill the room as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. We'd sit on the couch, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about small things. The weather, the neighborhood, trivialities that no one else would remember but we would. I used to think that those moments, those tiny ordinary moments, were the backbone of love. We didn't host family. We didn't need to. Our life was contained, self-sufficient, and to me, perfect. The outside world couldn't touch the sanctuary we'd built. Or so I believed. But even in the quietest, safest corners, cracks begin to form. I recall the first subtle moment that didn't sit right. A canceled dinner that wasn't mentioned in advance. A receipt that didn't match anything he told me. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself that loyalty was more important than doubt. He was trustworthy. I was sure of it. I wanted to believe it. I had to. That's the thing about trust. It can be a refuge and a trap at the same time. I trusted him so completely that I didn't notice the small inconsistencies, the little shadows that hinted at something hidden beneath the surface. By the time I saw the cracks clearly, they had become chasms I couldn't cross. Even then, I remember the smell of cinnamon in the house, the way sunlight fell across the kitchen table in the morning, the way our small Christmas tree stood in the corner, half-lit, quiet, waiting. Life felt steady, ordinary, safe. I wasn't naive. I wasn't blind. I was hopeful. Hopeful that small gestures could withstand whatever challenges came our way. Hopeful that love, patient, calm, silent love, was enough. On weekday mornings, he would leave early for work, and I would sit at the table, drinking my coffee slowly, savoring the quiet. The library was only a short walk away. I would pass the local shops, waving to familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries, and feel the rhythm of the town settle around me. Life was predictable, yes, but it was mine. Our life together was mine. Evenings were my favorite. He would return, sometimes tired, sometimes quiet, sometimes animated by small victories at work. We would cook together, or sometimes he would watch while I prepared dinner. He had a way of making small comments, pointing out tiny details that made me laugh. I adored those moments. They felt intimate, private, ours alone. But the cracks were there. Always there. Subtle, almost invisible, hiding beneath the layers of comfort and routine. I just couldn't see them yet. And why would I? Everything looked perfect. Everything felt normal. The house smelled like cinnamon, the coffee was always hot, and he smiled at me in that way that made the world feel gentle. Who would question that? I remember one evening, a week before Christmas, when I noticed an envelope tucked under the pile of bills on the counter. I picked it up and glanced at it quickly. He had placed it there casually, as though I wouldn't notice. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't from anyone I knew. I asked him about it later, casually, and he smiled, charming and calm as ever. Just work stuff, he said. Nothing to worry about. I nodded. I didn't worry. That was part of what made him trustworthy, or so I thought. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. And so, life moved forward. We carried on with our small routines. I wrapped gifts, baked cookies, and hung the few lights we owned. He made sure the outside lights were perfect, even if he teased me about my crooked garland. We shared quiet dinners and small laughs. Life was ordinary, comforting, steady. Yet beneath that ordinary life the cracks widened. Unseen. Unnoticed. Waiting. I remember that Christmas most clearly. It should have been simple, ordinary, quiet, the kind of holiday we liked. The tree was up, small and neat in the corner of the living room, lights twinkling softly. I baked my favorite apple pie, the cinnamon and sugar filling the kitchen with warmth. He insisted on making the coffee extra strong, teasing me about needing fuel for Christmas cheer. I laughed, stirring the steaming mug slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt normal. But even in that quiet perfection, there were moments that now, in retrospect, felt like warnings. He seemed distracted at times, checking his phone when I wasn't looking, muttering under his breath about work things I didn't fully understand. I chalked it up to stress. I wanted to believe he was still the same man I had loved, the man whose calm voice and steady hands had anchored me for years. We sat down for dinner that evening, just the two of us, and I noticed the subtle tension in his posture. His hand would hover over the table, then retract, as if he was holding something back. I asked about it casually, trying not to sound concerned. He smiled. Charming as always. Just thinking about work stuff, he said. I nodded. I believed him. After dinner, I washed the dishes while he cleaned the counters. The sound of running water, clinking dishes, and his hum in the background made the house feel safe. Cozy. Ordinary. That hum, so familiar, became the rhythm of my life. Steady, predictable, comforting. It was the last time I felt that way. Weeks later, the first hints of betrayal began to appear. I noticed small charges on the credit card statement. Transactions I didn't recognize. I asked him about them, casually, trying not to seem accusatory. Oh, that, he said, brushing it off. Business. You wouldn't understand. I nodded again, swallowing the doubt that threatened to rise. I wanted to trust him. I needed to trust him. That was what love meant, wasn't it? And yet, there were moments that gnawed at me. I would find receipts tucked in drawers, accounts opened in our name without discussion, subtle lies about meetings and phone calls. At first, I questioned myself. Was I overthinking? Paranoid? Too trusting? I told myself these things were minor, inconsequential. I focused on the warmth of the house, the smell of cinnamon, the comfort of routines. I clung to the ordinary life we had, to the illusion of security. Even now, I can see how carefully he orchestrated the ordinary. It was all so convincing. The breakfasts, the laughter, the quiet evenings. It was a facade built on charm and patience. A life meticulously designed to hide what lay beneath. Looking back, I realize how I ignored the signs. I wanted to. I needed to. Acknowledging them would have meant facing the possibility that my entire life, my trust, my loyalty, was built on deception. And I wasn't ready for that truth. So I carried on, blissfully unaware, anchored in the routines that made me feel safe. The house smelled of cinnamon and baked apples, the tree twinkled in the corner, and the lights outside cast a gentle glow. Life was ordinary. Life was calm. Life was perfect, or at least it appeared that way. But cracks, no matter how subtle, have a way of growing. And what once seemed ordinary would soon crumble into something unrecognizable. That Christmas, I didn't know it yet, but it would be the last time I felt truly safe in our life together. The ordinary life I had cherished was about to be replaced by questions, betrayal, and revelations that would leave me wondering not just who I could trust, but whether I could ever trust again. I leaned down slightly, pretending to tie my shoe, and glimpsed the screen. My stomach dropped. There were emails, professional, yes, but also personal messages I didn't recognize. Nothing explicit, nothing damning. But the tone, the subtle intimacy, the familiarity. It was enough to make my chest tighten, to make the air feel thick and heavy. I straightened up, heart racing, hands trembling slightly. He walked in then, silent as a shadow. I pretended to be arranging dishes. He glanced at me, a polite smile on his face, and said, "Everything okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. My stomach knotted with the sense that something hidden existed, something carefully masked by ordinary routines and small gestures. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every unexplained event over the past few weeks. Each memory felt different now. What I had ignored before, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious receipts, the small but persistent changes in behavior, now screamed at me with a clarity I couldn't deny. I began to ask myself questions I didn't have answers to. Was he hiding someone? Was there betrayal in the quiet? Or was I imagining it all, twisting ordinary life into suspicion? I couldn't stop looking for signs. One evening, I decided to take a walk, hoping that fresh air would clear my mind. The neighborhood was silent, snow beginning to fall lightly, frosting the streets and rooftops. The crunch of snow under my boots was loud in the stillness. I wrapped my coat tighter, imagining the world as it used to be. Predictable, safe, ordinary. But the unease stayed. It wasn't going anywhere. When I returned home, I found him in the kitchen, slicing bread for sandwiches. He looked at me with that familiar calm, that practiced warmth. "You're quiet tonight," he said. I forced a smile, nodding. Just thinking. He didn't press. He never did. That was part of why I trusted him so deeply. But the trust now felt like a fragile thread, one that could snap at any moment. Over the next few weeks, the small clues accumulated. A phone call he quickly ended, claiming it was work. A text message I caught for a brief moment before he swiped it away. A receipt from a boutique in town that I had never visited. Each instance alone was meaningless. Together, they wove a subtle, uncomfortable narrative that I couldn't ignore. And yet, I hesitated. I wanted proof, undeniable proof. I didn't want to accuse him based on suspicion alone. But the nagging feeling, the quiet, insistent whisper in the back of my mind, kept me alert, kept me awake, made me notice the patterns that had always been there, now suddenly impossible to dismiss. One evening, I found myself standing in the hallway, listening. His bedroom door was closed. I heard the faint vibration of his phone on the dresser. Hesitation gripped me, but I waited, breathing slowly, letting the rhythm of the house settle my nerves. The vibration stopped. Silence. Only the house remained. But by then, my mind was already racing. Questions I hadn't dared to ask yet bubbled up. Who was he really? What had I missed? And, most importantly, how long had this been going on? I went to bed that night with my heart heavy, the snow still falling softly outside. I stared at the ceiling, imagining a life where ordinary didn't mask secrets. Where trust wasn't blind. Where love didn't come with hidden costs. Sleep finally claimed me, but uneasily. Dreams twisted the ordinary into strange, surreal patterns. Lights flickering, doors closing, letters unopened. I woke several times, each time feeling the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. It wasn't a revelation yet. It wasn't betrayal. But it was the first spark. The tiny crack that would soon widen into a chasm I could no longer ignore. The ordinary life I had cherished, the calm, predictable routine, was no longer enough. I realized then that some truths wait patiently, silently, until you are forced to notice. And that night, for the first time in years, I noticed. By the following week, my quiet suspicion had grown into something more pressing. A need to know, to understand, to confront what I could no longer ignore. I moved through the house as though every sound, every shadow, could tell me the truth I had been avoiding. One evening, I returned home earlier than usual from work. The library had closed unexpectedly due to a staff shortage, and I had been sent home. It was early, just before dusk, and the sky was a bruised mix of gray and pink. The light slanted through the living room windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the floorboards. He was in the study, which he rarely used except for bills and tax documents. I could see the soft glow of the lamp through the frosted glass of the door. My heart thumped unevenly. I told myself to stop, to breathe, to not jump to conclusions. But I couldn't. I edged closer, quietly, just enough to see without being noticed. And then I saw it. A file, thick and labeled with a name I didn't recognize, lying open on his desk. The papers inside were partially covered, but enough was visible. Letters, small notes, photographs. My stomach lurched. Something about the way the documents were organized, deliberate, meticulous, told me this wasn't just casual correspondence. I stepped back, my pulse hammering. I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But deep down I knew. The next day, I found myself waiting for him in the kitchen after work. I carried the receipt from the boutique in my hand, the envelope a tangible reminder that ordinary life could be deceptive. When he walked in, the casual smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hi," I said softly, keeping my tone calm. I saw something yesterday." He paused, leaning against the counter, eyes cautious but not panicked. "What did you see?" I held up the receipt. "This. And other things. I don't understand." He exhaled slowly, a quiet surrender in his shoulders. "You've noticed," he said simply. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. I don't know what it means. But I feel like I've been missing something. For a long time." He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of remorse, a shadow I hadn't noticed before. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting you, our life. But I realize now that I was only protecting myself." My chest tightened. "Protecting yourself from what?" I asked. He hesitated, then lowered his eyes. "From the truth. From mistakes I didn't know how to fix. From losing everything. Including you." I felt tears sting my eyes. For months, I had been piecing together fragments of ordinary life that didn't fit. Now, confronted with the truth, the fragments snapped into place, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see. He reached out, tentative, as if asking permission. "I made choices you didn't know about. Decisions that hurt you. I can't change the past. But I want to be honest now. If you'll let me." I stepped back, uncertain. My trust had been eroded, layer by layer, by secrets that had festered beneath the calm surface. Yet, there was something in his voice, quiet, human, flawed, that made me hesitate to close the door completely. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I whispered. "Not yet." "I understand," he said softly. "I just want you to know everything. And I'm ready to face the consequences of what I've done." That night, he told me everything. Every secret, every misstep, every choice that had led to this moment. It was painful, the weight of reality pressing down, the betrayal clear and raw. And yet, amidst the heartbreak, there was a strange relief. The truth, once hidden, was finally out in the open. I cried, not just for the betrayal, but for the years of ordinary life that had masked it. For the quiet mornings, the small gestures, the laughter that now felt tinged with deception. And for the first time I allowed myself to grieve. Not for him but for what I had believed in. By the end of that night, exhaustion took over. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I had learned. The ordinary life I had cherished was gone, replaced by a reality that was both painful and liberating. And yet, even in the midst of betrayal, I felt a small spark of clarity. The past couldn't be undone. The betrayal couldn't be erased. But I could choose how to respond. I could choose my next steps. I could choose myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, but it felt different. Thicker somehow, the air weighted with unsaid words and unspoken truths. I moved slowly, mechanically, making coffee, arranging the kitchen, trying to anchor myself in routines that suddenly felt fragile. I needed a plan. Not revenge. Not yet, but clarity. I had to understand the depth of his betrayal before deciding how to respond. Each small detail from the past months, every subtle inconsistency, replayed in my mind. I began documenting them, quietly, meticulously, in a notebook I kept hidden in the bottom drawer of the kitchen. He was in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper, but I knew better. I could see the tension in his posture, the slight tightness in his jaw. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I observed, carefully, gauging his reactions. Finally, I set the notebook on the counter, as if by accident. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. He looked up, masking surprise with a polite nod. "I thought we did last night." "This is different," I said. "I need to understand everything fully." He nodded, resigned. "Okay," he said. "I'll answer anything you want." I started with the small details, the boutique receipts, the late-night calls, the unexplained purchases. He answered honestly, each confession a dagger wrapped in truth. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how carefully he had constructed his facade. Every ordinary gesture, every small routine, had been a veil hiding the reality I now faced. But I didn't act out of anger. Not yet. I was deliberate. I wanted him to understand that trust, once broken, could not be repaired with charm alone. I wanted him to see the impact of his actions without me losing myself in rage. Over the course of the day, I organized everything. Notes, receipts, screenshots of messages. Each piece formed a timeline, a clear record of the deception. It was methodical work, requiring patience, focus, and a steadiness I didn't know I possessed. When evening came, I confronted him fully. I laid out every detail, every inconsistency, every hidden act. I watched him closely, observing reactions that words could not disguise, the flicker of shame, the subtle tightening of his shoulders, the way his eyes avoided mine. "I see it all," I said finally, voice steady. "I know what's been happening. And I want you to understand. Actions have consequences. Not threats. Not anger. Consequences." He swallowed hard, nodding. "I do," he whispered. "I understand." And that night, I realized something important. Confronting betrayal doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require shouting, tears, or threats. It requires clarity, strength, and a refusal to let someone else's actions dictate your peace of mind. I made my decisions calmly. Small but firm steps to reclaim control of my life. I adjusted passwords, changed accounts, and began reclaiming the ordinary routines that had been tainted by deception. Each action felt like a small victory, a quiet assertion of self, a reminder that I was not powerless. Yet, even as I took these steps, I didn't act out of cruelty. I didn't humiliate or punish. Instead, I focused on boundaries, clarity, and truth. I wanted justice, yes, but dignified justice, not revenge born of anger. The act of reclaiming my life was empowering. It shifted the dynamic, reminding both of us that ordinary life is a foundation, not a prison. Betrayal can shake the walls, but it cannot destroy the floor beneath your feet if you are deliberate in rebuilding it. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the house had changed. It was still the same home, same rooms, same smells. Yet, there was a difference. An awareness, a quiet vigilance, a boundary that hadn't existed before. And most importantly, I felt strength. Strength I hadn't realized I possessed. Strength that came not from confrontation alone, but from calm, deliberate action. From understanding the truth. From reclaiming ordinary life and turning it into a platform for self-respect and dignity. Over the next few days, I began to implement small but deliberate changes. I started with practical boundaries. Changing passwords, securing bank accounts, and ensuring that the hidden corners of our life were no longer accessible to deception. Each adjustment was quiet, almost mundane, but it filled me with a sense of regained control. He noticed immediately. Not in anger, but in the subtle tension of a man realizing that his careful concealment no longer held power. I didn't explain every step. I didn't need to. The message was clear. I was no longer unaware, and I was no longer vulnerable. But control alone wasn't enough. I needed clarity, closure, and assurance that this life, this home, could be rebuilt on honesty rather than illusion. I asked him to be fully transparent. Every meeting, every conversation, every decision he had concealed. It was exhausting for both of us, but necessary. Every truth revealed chipped away at the lingering shadow of suspicion. One evening, I asked him to sit with me in the living room, the soft glow of the lamps casting a warm, forgiving light over the room. The Christmas tree still stood, modest and twinkling, a reminder of ordinary joys that could survive disruption. I held his hands gently, feeling the tremor of nervous energy beneath his calm exterior. "Do you understand how deeply this hurt?" I asked softly, voice steady but laden with weight. He nodded, eyes downcast. "I do," he whispered. "I can't undo it, but I promise. I will do everything I can to rebuild your trust. I want to make this right." And I believed him, not fully, not yet, but enough to see the possibility of healing. Healing wouldn't be instant. It wouldn't be easy. But I had reached the point where I was willing to allow it, cautiously, deliberately. Defined solely by betrayal or fear. I was more than suspicion, more than pain. I was capable of creating a life that included both trust and self-respect. The following days were filled with small rituals of transparency. He shared work emails openly, answered questions without defensiveness, and allowed me to participate in decisions I had previously been excluded from. I watched, cautiously, learning to trust again, aware that true trust takes time to rebuild. I also took steps to reconnect with my own life, independent of him. I visited the library more often, engaged with neighbors, and began volunteering at the community center. These small actions reminded me that my identity wasn't defined solely by betrayal or fear. I was more than suspicion, more than pain. I was capable of creating a life that included both trust and self-respect. One evening, while sipping coffee on the porch, he joined me. We sat in silence for a while, the cold air crisp against our faces, the lights of the neighborhood soft and distant. He reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "I know this will take time," he said softly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I hope we can find our way back." I nodded, feeling the tension in my chest ease slightly. "We will," I replied, not with certainty, but with intention. The first step had been taken, and that mattered more than anything. It was in these small, deliberate actions, honesty, transparency, accountability, that the real reaction unfolded. Not dramatic confrontation, not vengeance, but the slow, steady assertion of truth and boundaries. I had reclaimed the ordinary life, but it was no longer naive. It was intentional, grounded in experience and awareness. Evenings became quieter, gentler. Conversations, though careful, carried an honesty previously absent. He would ask about my day at the library, and I would share without hiding the unease I still felt. He listened. He adapted. He learned. And through it all, I realized something profound. Action doesn't always have to be explosive to be effective. Sometimes, the quiet, deliberate steps, the patient, methodical reclamation of one's life, are more powerful than any dramatic confrontation. I had acted not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. Not out of cruelty but out of necessity. And in that calm assertion of my boundaries, I discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed. By the end of that week, our home had changed. The ordinary life I had once cherished had been tainted, yes, but it had also been transformed. The small rituals, the coffee, the lighted tree, the quiet evenings, were now infused with awareness and intention. Trust would take time, but the first seeds of a new, honest life were planted. The following weeks were a delicate balancing act. Every conversation, every interaction, became a test. Not just of him but of myself. Could I maintain composure? Could I navigate honesty without falling into bitterness or resentment? Could I reclaim the ordinary life that had been tainted, and make it stronger than before? I focused on small victories. If he was truthful about a call, I acknowledged it. If he shared a receipt, I didn't interrogate, simply noted it. Every act of transparency, no matter how small, became a stepping stone toward rebuilding trust. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me. About reclaiming my agency, my peace of mind, my identity beyond betrayal. I began journaling every evening, reflecting on what I had learned, how I had been manipulated, and the small ways I was taking back control. Writing became a therapy, a compass, a way to make sense of the chaos that had infiltrated our lives. There were moments of tension, yes. Small arguments sparked when old habits collided with new boundaries. A late night at work. A forgotten message. But these moments, instead of unraveling me, became opportunities to assert clarity and patience. I learned to ask calmly, to insist on honesty, to set limits without anger. One particular night, I sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the soft glow of the Christmas tree reflecting in the window. He joined me, offering a cup of tea, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Not complete peace. Not yet, but a fragile, hopeful peace. "I can't promise it will be easy," he said quietly. "But I want to earn your trust back. Every day." I nodded, letting the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. "And I want to believe that we can," I said, voice soft but firm. "But we take it day by day. Step by step." We agreed on small rituals, honest conversations at the end of each day, shared planning for holidays, transparency about schedules. The ordinary routines returned, but now with intention. Coffee in the morning, walks in the evening, and quiet evenings reading by the fire. The ordinary had transformed into something resilient. The most important action I took, however, was allowing myself to forgive. Not for him, but for me. Forgiveness wasn't instant. It wasn't a declaration. It was a gradual release of the anger and resentment that had taken root in my chest. With each act of honesty he offered, with each acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I felt the tight knot in my chest loosen. By the time Christmas approached, our home had shifted. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples returned. The lights on the tree glimmered softly. We decorated together, shared small gifts, and for the first time in months, I felt a quiet, cautious hope. I realized that action doesn't always have to be dramatic to be meaningful. It doesn't require revenge, confrontation, or humiliation. Sometimes, the quiet, deliberate steps, honesty, transparency, and reclaiming one's life, are the most powerful acts of all. I had faced betrayal, uncovered deception, and acted with calm and clarity. I had set boundaries, reclaimed control, and insisted on truth. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faint glimmer of possibility. A life rebuilt not on illusions, but on honesty, awareness, and the quiet, ordinary moments that carry real meaning. And I knew as I sipped my coffee that morning, as the snow lightly dusted the neighborhood outside, that ordinary life could survive betrayal. That trust could be rebuilt. That peace could be found. Not perfect, but real, intentional, and deeply rewarding. Once the private confrontation was complete, the next step was to face the consequences. Not out of vengeance, but for clarity and accountability. The truth could no longer remain hidden, not just for me, but for the people connected to our lives. The first person I decided to involve was my closest friend, Clara. She had always been my anchor, the one who noticed the tiny shifts in my demeanor long before I admitted there was something wrong. I invited her over one evening, the warm glow of the living room lights reflecting off the Christmas ornaments. "Something's happened," I said, my voice calm but steady. "I need your advice, and I need someone who knows me to help me process it." She listened, eyes wide, nodding, but never interrupting. I told her everything, the suspicions, the receipts, the hidden messages, and finally, the confrontation. Every detail was laid bare, every hidden layer exposed. Clara reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You did the right thing," she said softly. "You faced it calmly. You've acted with dignity. And you're taking control of your life." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. Validation, support, and understanding, things that betrayal can often rob you of, were now present. I realized then that part of reclaiming my life meant allowing others to see the truth and support me in response. One afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, baking gingerbread cookies with our youngest. Flour dusted the counters, the smell of molasses and cinnamon filling the air. I glanced at him standing nearby, quietly preparing icing, and realized something remarkable. Ordinary life once shattered, could be rebuilt, and even enriched, through intention and care. We spoke about the past, briefly, carefully, without blame. "I know I hurt you," he said quietly. "And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just Want to show you that I can be better. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. And I want to allow myself to heal, I replied. Step by step. Day by day. That was the essence of healing. Deliberate choice. Not ignoring the past, not pretending it hadn't happened, but deciding to move forward with awareness, dignity, and intentionality. Each day, trust slowly returned, not fully, not blindly, but cautiously, with reason and evidence. I also focused on myself, reconnecting with passions and friendships that had been neglected. Volunteering at the community center, attending a book club, and writing in my journal became avenues for rediscovery. I realized that healing required personal investment, time, energy, and care for myself, before it could fully extend to relationships. By the time the week of Christmas arrived, the house felt transformed. Lights twinkled on the tree, the scent of cookies lingered in every room, and the warmth of shared meals created a sense of home I had feared lost. Ordinary routines, coffee in the morning, walks in the snow, evening conversations, now carried intentionality, grounding us in the present and the future. The emotional weight of betrayal had been heavy, yes, but the healing process revealed a deeper truth. Resilience is born from facing pain, not avoiding it. Trust, once broken, can be rebuilt through honesty, consistency, and patience. Ordinary life, once disrupted, can be restored and even strengthened through deliberate care and love. As Christmas morning arrived, the house was alive with warmth, laughter, and the gentle buzz of anticipation. The betrayal that had once shadowed every corner now seemed like a distant memory, softened by time, honesty, and deliberate rebuilding. I watched as he helped our youngest hang ornaments on the tree, their laughter blending with the soft hum of Christmas music in the background. There was no tension, no secrecy. Just shared moments of care and joy. The ordinary life I had feared lost had returned, but it was now more resilient, more intentional, more honest. We exchanged gifts, small but meaningful, each gesture a reminder that connection isn't measured by extravagance but by sincerity. I received a handmade ornament from him, simple yet thoughtful, a symbol of transparency, accountability, and the effort he had made to rebuild trust. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief and gratitude. That evening, we sat together by the fire, sipping cocoa and reflecting on the year. I shared my journal, my reflections, and the small lessons I had learned through betrayal and reconciliation. He listened, truly listened, offering acknowledgement, remorse, and commitment to continue growing. It struck me then that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it, learning from it, and using those lessons to build a stronger foundation. The betrayal had shown me vulnerability, yes, but it had also revealed my capacity for strength, patience, and deliberate action. I also reconnected with family and friends, sharing parts of my journey with them. Their support reinforced the notion that ordinary life thrives not in isolation but in connection. The community around me, once unaware of the undercurrents, now became a source of affirmation, encouragement, and shared understanding. By the end of Christmas Day, a quiet peace had settled over our home. The snow outside glistened softly in the streetlights, and the air smelled faintly of pine and baking. I realized that ordinary life, full of routines, love, and connection, had survived betrayal. It had been tested, yes, but it had endured, strengthened by intentionality, honesty, and the careful nurturing of trust. I reflected on the journey: suspicion, discovery, confrontation, accountability, consequences, and healing. Each step had been necessary. Each moment of deliberate action had led to this point. An ordinary yet extraordinary life rebuilt on clarity, honesty, and moral strength. In that quiet moment, I made a choice. I chose to let go of lingering resentment. I chose to embrace the present and the potential for a renewed, honest relationship. I chose to live fully, aware of the past but not imprisoned by it. And I felt hope. Genuine, cautious, but real. Hope that trust could be rebuilt. Hope that ordinary life, even after deception, could return to warmth, laughter, and shared joy. Hope that the future, though uncertain, could be guided by honesty, accountability, and intention. I understood finally that betrayal doesn't have to define life. That consequences, when faced directly, restore balance. That healing is a process, deliberate and patient, and that ordinary life, once disrupted, can emerge stronger, more intentional, and deeply meaningful. The snow continued to fall softly outside, the lights on the Christmas tree twinkling gently, and I felt a quiet certainty. We had survived. We had faced truth, embraced accountability, and found the beginnings of renewal. And in that, there was a peace that no betrayal could ever take away. As the quiet of Christmas night settled over our home, I sat by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey from betrayal to healing had been long and exhausting, filled with fear, doubt, and moments when I questioned whether trust could ever be restored. But now, as I looked around at the twinkling lights, the cozy home, and the soft snow falling outside, I realized something profound. Ordinary life could survive even the deepest wounds, if faced with courage, honesty, and intention. I wanted to share this story, not just as a confession, but as a reminder. Life isn't perfect. People make mistakes, secrets are kept, and betrayal can come in the most ordinary forms. But we have the power to respond, not with anger alone, but with clarity, dignity, and deliberate action. Healing doesn't happen overnight, and trust isn't rebuilt with words alone. It requires patience, transparency, and the willingness to take small, consistent steps toward truth. As I recount these events, I think of the moments that shaped me, the subtle signs I almost ignored, the courage it took to confront what I suspected, the deliberate choices I made to reclaim control of my life, and the patience required to allow healing to unfold. Each step, though painful at the time, was necessary. Each moment of deliberate action strengthened not just my home, but myself. And in the end, there is a lesson I hope resonates with anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation. Betrayal may shake your life, but it cannot destroy your strength. Accountability and transparency may be uncomfortable, even painful, but they are essential for true resolution. And the ordinary everyday moments, sharing a meal, hanging an ornament, walking in the snow, can become profound acts of love, connection, and renewal when approached with honesty and care. So I ask you, dear viewer, if faced with betrayal, would you find the courage to confront it? Would you choose truth and intention over anger and secrecy? And most importantly, would you allow yourself to heal, step by step, reclaiming your ordinary life and building it stronger than before? This story is not just mine. It is a reminder that ordinary life, even after being fractured, can return to warmth, joy, and connection. That hope, patience, and deliberate action can restore what once seemed lost. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it gave you hope, or if it inspired you to face your own challenges with courage, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support allows these stories of real life, resilience, and renewal to continue reaching those who need them most. May your holidays be filled with honesty, warmth, and the courage to face life's truths, knowing that ordinary life can always be rebuilt, stronger, brighter, and full of hope.